stream, so welcome to all of you. Our time together today, mostly we'll be hearing about the plan going forward, and as Tim mentioned at the end of worship, thanks to Ed Cunnington, you'll hear from him as well, and we'll introduce the other members of the succession planning team who've been discerning and listening and working over the last year or so on this, though they haven't known any specifics. They haven't known the date much longer than any of the rest of us. But before we get into sort of planning and logistics, I just want to acknowledge there might be a whole range of feelings that you're experiencing right now. Yeah, just this, JC, right? Tim met and shared his news with the officers on the various boards on Thursday evening, and there were tears, there was laughter. I think that was probably the gamut of joy and happiness for Tim and for Beth, but it does feel like a loss. There's some real grief in the relationships that we've shared, in the ways that Tim has led, and what we shared with Tim and Beth and their family. And so we need to acknowledge that and name that, I think, and we'll probably move each in our own way, but all of us together through various stages as we move into the next 6 months. But ultimately, I know there is just such gratitude and joy and thanksgiving for Tim and Beth as they move into the next chapter. And there will be time for celebration. We won't have a lot of specifics around that, but know that there will be a lot of time for celebrating together as a community and giving our thanks. We have some slides to share with you, and then we'll have some Q&A. We'll pass some microphones around to make sure you have a chance to have your questions answered, and we'll pull in those from the live stream as well, making sure that you have a chance to get your thoughts into this conversation as well. And as we prepare to move ahead into all of this, let us be together in prayer. Let us pray. Holy God, thank you for this day of worship, a time to be together as community, to lift our voices in prayer and song, to sit in silence with you and one another. We give you thanks for this church home and for each one of us as we find our place in it and as you send us out to be your people in the world. As we come together specifically right now with the news on our hearts of Tim's retirement, we give thanks for his leadership. And we give to you all that we're feeling, all that we're holding on to individually and as a community, and we trust in the guidance and the wisdom of your Spirit and the way ahead. Be with us in our conversation and our listening today. May it be pleasing in your sight. And all this we offer in your Son's name. Amen. Okay. This time I'd like to welcome forward Ed Cunnington to start our presentation.
Thank you. We'll go over basically what we've done to get to this point and the process going forward, and then part of the components of that plan, and then as Megan said, would open for questions. Keith? So to begin with, as Tim said this morning, it's been about a year. It's with his foresight and understanding of the complications and the complexities of the transition that he suggested to the Personnel Committee that they bring forward a suggestion to the session to form this team. They did that in April. The PCSM, our Personnel Committee, brought it to the session in April. In May, the session approved that charter and approved the members of the team. And it was done with without the understanding of exactly what those dates would be that Tim would retire, but we knew that there were and are a number of tasks that need to be identified, understood, and planned for. And so basically this past year has been trying to identify those. We currently have about 58 tasks, and those do not include some of the committees that will be part of this whole process. Keith? So our team, certainly it's been a strong team that has been able to do this and accomplish it. Barbara Brown, Megan joined our team about a month ago so that we'd have a liaison with the staff. Catherine Allen Halverson, Rocky Rockenstein, Gordon Stouffer, Emily Tim, and Nancy Olvested were members from the church. Why don't you stand up? Nancy, Barbara, Catherine. We also, from the beginning, had the advisor from the Reverend Dr. John Wilkinson. The Personnel Committee had the opportunity to work with him a few years ago, and he has a broad knowledge, a broad network. He has served churches in Rochester, New York. He was for 7 years at Fourth in Chicago, and most recently served a church in Philadelphia. He is starting in May. He'll be moving to a position with PCUSA. But he was great help. He has been in succession planning himself. In the transition, he has a network, a large network that is familiar with many of these the churches that have gone through this, and so it was a great help for us. So this, I'll say SBT. If we're using any acronyms that you are not familiar, please just let us know, because there are a lot of them out there. But SBT, we met regularly. The intent of the team in the first place, and the reason why it took a year, is because there are a lot of complexities with this. Our intent, working with the Presbytery, is not to skip any of the processes, not to circumvent any of the needs of that process, but to the extent we could, to run some of those concurrently. If it were to be a linear process, it could be over 2 years. And so we wanted to, without minimizing or excluding any of the steps of the process along the way, we did want to find ways of compressing that process. So in that endeavor, we sought over 18 different contacts. There were congregations, there were pastors, there were lay leaders, they were elders of churches, presbyters, all of whom had gone through a succession and transition process recently. We spoke with and worked with, as we will continue to do, with the leadership in our own presbytery, PTCA, which is Presbytery of the Twin Cities area. And then we created this plan, this sequence of events that we felt needed to take place. So the process in moving forward, basically we want to celebrate Tim's ministry. We want to then, or need to, hire a transitional pastor. Interim has been a word used, but more now the term transition is being acknowledged as the word to use. And then the process of calling the new head of staff. We certainly want to focus on the celebration of Tim's ministry, the celebrate for Tim and Beth for certainly the 25 years, nearly 25 years that he's been here, but 40 years of his wonderful ministry. And he deserves that, and we plan on having a committee we'll be forming probably within the next month or so that will have the express purpose of planning those events. The interim or transitional pastor will be the work of the Personnel Committee, PCSM, Personnel Committee for Staff and Ministers. They are right now working on creating a position description for that person. They will conduct a search. They'll use the resources of the Presbytery. They'll use our own network of resources, the network of others, to find the right person, and they will then present that to the Presbytery for approval, and then finally the session will hire that person. So as we call a new head of staff, these are some of the basic activities that are going to have to take place. The succession planning team has begun to form the ministry and mission study team. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. Personnel committee needs to create a position description for the head of staff, for the new head of staff. Once that is done, it'll be approved by our session and then needs to be approved by the Presbytery. Both the ministry and mission study will evolve into or provide information for the position description. Each of those need to be reviewed by and approved by the Presbytery before we move on, and the congregation then will select the pastor nominating committee. The PNC will then look and find our head of staff, which will result in the Presbytery approving and the congregation calling the new head of staff. So that basically is what we're rolling into. Keith? So that it doesn't go undone, I need to shout out Keith Kopatz and Eric Adams for connections that they continue to provide for us. Mentioned John Wilkinson. Every one of our meetings, he was in there by Zoom, and the connection of those guys is really great. And also, got to say that the engine that keeps so many things working here at Westminster, the administrative assistant for Tim and Megan, Janice Tellickson, does it all. And a lot of words can describe her, but to begin and end, it would be awesome. Okay, so this ministry and mission study is a key element. I think of it almost as the first domino, because that study needs to be complete before we can move on to get a PNC. The study will involve the community. It'll involve input from the congregation. Basically, it's looking for not only the past and the present, but what God's Spirit is leading through our congregation is leading us into what we want to have in the future. And so it is a significant document. not only to check the box, but to use as a means of what that position description will look like for the new head of staff and where we as a church want to go. We're really fortunate in that Gretchen Musicant and Lee Niebuhr have agreed to chair that committee and are now working at looking for members to fill it in. So the pastor nominating committee will not be able to be formed until that mission study is complete. And that mission study again will lead into what the head of staff position description will look like. Each of those need to be reviewed and approved by the Presbytery, first by our session and then by the Presbytery. And once that is done and complete, then the Presbytery gives us the permission to form a pastor nominating committee, the PNC. So once we have that, those two pieces in place, then our congregation nominating committee will present a list of members for the PNC to the congregation, and you as the congregation will elect that PNC, which will then eventually bring to you the new recommended head of staff. So how can you be involved, or what can you do? Certainly attend those listening sessions. As I said, they're key. It's a domino that'll start all of this happening. We need to have your input on where we should be going as a church. The information will be available on the website for pastor transition. You see monthly updates in the Westminster News, and certainly through the website calendar, bulletins, and the Friday e-blast. Suzanne McEnroy, our Director of Communications, has been key in pulling this together, and will continue to be part of that, an integral part of the communication. And from now on, now that the news is out, there should be total transparency, and if you're not feeling it's there, then we need to hear about it, because our intent is that there's not much now that will be behind the scenes. Questions?
All right, Jock, we've got one over here from Jock. Ed?
Jack?
What role do you see the SPT playing going forward? Is it overarching? Is it advisory? Is it going to disband?
Yeah, I'm afraid it will not disband. There would be basically three committees. I mentioned the celebration committee, the Ministry and Mission Study Committee, and the third is the SBT. SBT will be here to help coordinate, provide resources, build a group that will be flexible and move within the ongoing processes. Other questions?
Okay, yep, come to you, Lloyd.
I suspect there isn't any hard and fast timeline, but in terms of and maybe I came in a little late, so perhaps I missed it, but is there a guideline we have in terms of hoping to have a new pastor selected by a certain date or a certain quarter of the calendar year?
It's the natural question. As I said in the beginning, our intent was to run concurrently a number of these processes that would help shorten the time. We are currently in conversation with the Presbytery on timing issues, and expect that we'll be able to adopt something that will meet the needs of Westminster. Certainly the last time we went through this, I saw Mark Thomas reminding me of the last time we went through this. It was a different situation. We needed a longer separation period, but while we don't want to slide over opportunities to hear the voices that will help us determine what we want in the future, we do not feel that there's a fracture there that needs to have an extended period of time. The way churches are across the country today suggests that as attendance goes down, to suggest that a congregation where attendance is strong and continues to be, where programs are strong and continue to be, we don't want to damage that possibility of, because it's extended. So here, a while back, the Book of Order allowed for some flexibility amongst the presbyteries in how they handle this. And so that's why we went nationally and looking at, for input to our plan. And there are a number of different situations, a number of different experiences and opportunities for adjustment of past practices. So that's what our conversation is with the Presbytery on what makes sense and how can we do that in an orderly fashion and yet in one that recognizes the needs of Westminster. That didn't exactly answer your question, but
Ed, we've got,
normally, I'll just say, the linear process would have it more than 2 years. We would like to cut that in half.
so we've got Jenna over there, and while we're getting prepped over there, we have one question, Ed, from the live stream. A good question, maybe others of you have. We haven't heard the words head of staff. So is there a difference between senior pastor and are we looking for head of staff? So Tim's official title is senior pastor / head of staff. And I think he would probably most likely introduce himself as the senior pastor of Westminster, but he also, by virtue of that, is the head of staff. So the next person we will search for, it will be the senior pastor / head of staff. They're not distinguished from one another in that way. So thanks.
you.
Yeah. Jenna?
I guess my question had to do with the timing where you said you thought it was about 2 years, but, for this transition time. I thought in the past it was more like 1 year, except this last time it went on longer. And I was wondering if the time where we're using, like between October and January 1st, if that counted as part of the transition time where we would have an interim or a transition pastor, if that would be part of the 1 or 2 year time where there would be someone here.
Yeah, we are right now looking at, as Tim said, his last day would be October 31st. We're looking for the current, we've got a powerful, strong staff, and we're looking for them to carry through the end of the year. Really, from the Presbytery's point of view, I think they would say that the time starts when Tim leaves, the transition. Our plan would suggest that the time starts now. Because the formation of the Ministry and Mission Study Committee, for example, we feel there's a lot of things that can be done with that committee in gathering information, before Tim leaves. The finances, the space, the normal demographics that are needed for that study can all be done before he leaves. In fact, he's going to be gone on a trip. We're looking at having part of our listening sessions during that time. So there are areas like that we want to compress and come to an understanding with the Presbytery on that timing.
Janet has a
Janet?
question?
Just a follow-up to that. So which of these pieces will overlap for your condensing of the whole process?
Well, certainly the celebration committee's work, the events that will be going on with that would be overlapping with the committee for the MMS, the Ministry and Mission Study. That would be overlap. In the past, there have been programs that use those sequentially. So you had a linear function. You'd have your celebration, and then you'd have your several months of the MMS committee doing their work, and then after that, it would be the rolling all of that information into head of staff position description, and so we recognize that there needs to be separation time. We need to get used to the idea that Tim's not going to be in the pulpit, and we're looking at a consultant that would help us, who's been familiar with those kinds of processes and transitions to help the staff relate to that, to help our committees relate to it. But those would be things that would be happening concurrently as opposed to in a linear function.
And we're still waiting on final guidance from the Presbytery. It would be really nice to say the exact sequence of things, as you know, Ed just said, in a linear fashion, but we don't quite have all that yet, but we're getting close. Yeah. Bill, did you have a question?
First of all, thank you to you and the committee for this phenomenal work. It's such important work, and we really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. The team has been powerful.
Yeah. My question was, has the team given particular thought to the transition position? Do you have hopes or guidance about that? What are your maybe early thoughts?
The transition pastor?
Yes.
That is in right now, the position, that description is being crafted by the Personnel Committee. That is under their umbrella. They will then use the resources available, and there are many, our own networks as well as those from the Presbytery, in looking at that position description and then going out and searching. We have a large network throughout the country. I mentioned John Wilkinson was our advisor, continues to acknowledge the reputation of Westminster, and because of that, excuse me, because of that, there are a lot of candidates that will be identified, but it'll be the Personnel Committee, PCSM, that will identify that person. They'll bring it to the Presbytery for approval. They run background checks, and then the session will be the body that the Westminster session will be the body then that hires that person.
We had a question on the live stream. If someone has ideas for possible candidates for the interim transitional role, to whom should they direct those?
They should go to Brent Hall, was here someplace. But Brent, Paul, I don't know, Brent or Paul.
Probably both Paul and
Right
Brent are
now,
both.
there's a transition there. Brent Hall is rolling off. Paul Arbisi is rolling on as chair of the Personnel Committee. So one of those two people would be fine.
And if anyone has trouble contacting them, you can reach out to me. Don't send me the candidate information, but you can reach out to me and I'll connect you. Any other questions in the room? Yep, Dwayne has a question. Get him. Oh. Dwayne, we're going to have you wait because the folks on the live stream might not pick up your question. So thanks, Alexandra.
In our approval of the annual financial compensation of our senior minister, head of staff, I recall being told when we're meeting in the sanctuary that the compensation is reviewed vis-a-vis compensation of pastors of other large metropolitan Presbyterian congregations, and the compensation of Tim Hart Anderson has been consistent with that. Looking forward, is that going to be true, or are we going to have a big jump in salary?
I think what's true is that Westminster will be competitive. And they continue to search out comparable salaries, and they'll continue to do that. It's too early to speculate on what the resume of the new person will look like. So I can only say that I know from experience on Personnel Committee and from the session that our intent is to be competitive so that that does not become an issue when we're hiring or calling.
It looks like Jim Brazel has a question. Alexandra's coming to you with the mic, Jim.
Not a
I
question.
don't know
not a
that we will
question.
accept you, Jim, but go ahead.
Not a question, Ed, but a comment, and that is, there's a natural tendency to want to say, when's the new senior pastor going to be here? Let's focus on getting that and so on, and that's understandable. But at the same time, I would urge all of us to remember that transition is not just marking time. This is a time when some really important things can happen in the life of a congregation. We've got a great staff that will continue programs, but it's a time when there can be some reflection, some thinking ahead. What do we need at this point in time in that kind of leadership? And I urge people to regard this as a time having its own importance in the life and history of the church.
Thanks, Jim. And those sentiments were strong in our deliberation of our plan, recognizing that, as I said, the separation is necessary, the time is necessary for us to reflect, and at the same time, certainly celebrating Tim and Beth here. But we need that time, and yet we're trying to balance the time that is perfect and the time that is not.
Oh, looks like is that Barbara Mauk? Yes.
I wanted to add to what Jim said too. I have a wonderfully warm heart when I look around the room and see that a lot of you were here 31 years ago when we were saying goodbye to Don Meisel, and many more of you were here when we were searching for Tim. And our job is to show up like Joe Davis told us to do during COVID, and that's really how we can help them the most. And I just, it's easy to say, well, things are a little different. I don't think I'll go this Sunday. If we keep coming back, why, that's one of the best things we can do to help in this search. So congratulations to everyone on the planning. Our hearts are full of love and joy for Tim and gratefulness, and for Beth too. But we have work to do, and that's to be here and be present. But thanks to everybody.
Thanks, Barbara. Does any of you of the team, Rocky and Gordon, I know are out of town, Catherine, Nancy, Barbara, anything we've missed?
I'm not seeing anything else in the live stream chat for now. Just a reminder as well, you've got the information on the website is already there, and that'll be a great resource to continue to return to. There is another information session next Sunday in here between services at 9:15. It is identical. We don't expect to have any more information next week. So if you were wondering, that's really just to capture folks who weren't able to come to this today, and especially for our 8:30 worshipers who may not have intended to stay all the way through. We don't want to rush through, I don't think, Ed, but also just honoring everyone's time, and we're not providing lunch for you here today. And I think, I'm very willing to hang back and chat with anybody who didn't feel like comfortable asking a public question. Ed, anything else you would add?
No.
Okay, I might just close in a brief prayer, and let's pray. We give you thanks, O God, for the continual call on our lives and on this congregation, and the call on Tim's life over 25 years ago to bring him here to lead and serve among us. We trust in your Spirit's leading, that you are already present in the places where you are taking us, and that you are working in the lives of those who will come and lead and serve among us. Be with us as we go out into the remainder of this day, as you send us out to witness to your love and your peace and your justice in this city and beyond. Amen. Thanks all.